When Matt moved into the old New England house in late September, he expected nothing more than creaky floors, a few drafts, and maybe a raccoon or two. The place had been in his late uncle's name, someone Matt barely remembered, and it stood on the outskirts of a forgotten town, where the woods seemed to lean too close to the walls and the night fell heavier than anywhere else he'd lived. His first few nights were quiet, but then the tapping started. It came just after 3 in the morning, light, methodical, tap, tap, tap. At first he thought it was a tree branch, but the rhythm was too intentional, like knuckles on glass. He turned toward the bedroom window and saw nothing, just blackness outside and the faint outline of his own reflection. He laughed it off. Old houses always had their quirks. But the next night, the tapping came again, and this time it moved, not from the window, but from the wooden wall across the room. Tap, 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 faster, closer, like fingernails raking across timber. Matt sat up, heart pounding. He turned on every light in the room. Silence. The tapping stopped the second light touched the floor. The following day, he mentioned it casually to an elderly neighbor named Harry. The man frowned, eyes narrowing. "You ever hear of spirit bells?" Matt shook his head. "Hang small bells by your bed. Old belief from these parts. Sound keeps the wicked ones away. Makes it harder for them to cross into this world." Matt smiled, unsure whether to laugh or take it seriously. But that evening, he drove to the nearest antique store and bought a pair of tiny, worn silver bells. He hung them from the curtain rod above his bed. That night, there was no tapping. But just as he began to drift into sleep, he heard something worse. A whine. High-pitched, piercing, faint as a whisper, yet it cut through the silence like glass. It sounded like something in pain or angry. It didn't come from the window or the walls. It came from inside the room. Matt lay frozen, gripping the covers. The bells jingled once, lightly, then again, but there was no wind. When morning finally came, Matt dragged himself out of bed, drained and on edge. He headed to the kitchen to feed his pet parrot, Buzz, his only real company in the house. The cage was in the corner near the window. It was shut, just like always. But Buzz was gone. No feathers, no signs of escape. The latch was still fastened. It was as if the bird had been plucked out of existence. He stared at the empty cage in disbelief. Cold air drifted in from the slightly cracked kitchen window, but the screen was undisturbed. A few drops of water, too large for a bird, marked the tile beneath the cage. He didn't remember seeing them before. Matt spent the rest of the day in a fog, trying to rationalize. Maybe Buzz had squeezed through the bars. Maybe he was hiding. Maybe, but the truth itched at the back of his skull. Something had been in the house. That night, He sat up in bed with a flashlight in one hand and his phone camera pointed at the window. He was determined to catch whatever it was. He didn't even realize he had started to listen for the sound, the tapping, and then, as if summoned, tap, tap, tap. The sound was different this time. It came from the kitchen, the same place where Buzz's cage stood. Matt crept down the hall, flashlight beam trembling across the cracked wooden floor. As he reached the kitchen, the tapping stopped. The room was empty, or so he thought. He turned toward the window, and that's when he saw it. A figure, small, humanoid, its face pressed against the outside of the glass. It was the size of a child, but all wrong. Limbs too thin, skin too gray, too smooth, stretched like old leather. Its eyes were far too big for its face, round, wet, unblinking. A few strands of wiry hair hung from its scalp like threads. And the smile. A line of jagged, rotting teeth, permanently curved into a grin too wide for its skull. Its stubby hand lifted. Tap, 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 tap. Matt stood frozen, watching as the thing matched his gaze perfectly, as if it had been watching him all along. It tilted its head slowly, almost curiously, and then it was gone, vanished into the darkness outside, as if swallowed whole by the night. By morning, Matt was running on fumes. His face looked sunken in the bathroom mirror, pale and streaked with shadow. The image in the glass trembled, maybe from his shaking hands, maybe not. He didn't go to work. He didn't eat. He unplugged everything with a screen, phone, TV, even the microwave. He taped newspaper to the windows and closed every curtain in the house. The bells were still over his bed, but he added 2 more above the kitchen door and another on the closet handle. And yet, he still felt it, watching, breathing. That evening, as dusk crept in and shadows stretched long across the walls, he heard a new sound. Not tapping, not the whisper. It was the sound of the birdcage shifting. He froze in the living room. He hadn't touched the cage since Buzz disappeared. But now it scraped across the tile, soft and slow, like metal feet dragging against stone. He crept to the kitchen door. The light inside was flickering. He reached for the knob, then stopped. From within, he heard the bells above the kitchen door ring violently, as if swatted by a furious hand. Then came a new sound, clink, 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 like something knocking against the inside of the birdcage. Then, a sharp shriek. Not a scream, not human. A high-pitched, glassy whine that pierced his skull. He staggered back, clutching his ears. Behind the door, the sound escalated. Scratching, clinking, then a voice, but not words, not English. Garbling, like static, speaking through broken teeth. He fell to the floor, shaking. When the sound finally stopped, he found himself alone. The house was silent again. But that night, sleep was impossible. Even under the covers, flashlight in hand, the darkness of the room felt dense, He wrapped the bells around his wrists like bracelets. If he moved, he wanted them to make noise. If they stopped, he'd know. At 3:11 a.m., the first tap came from under the bed. Matt didn't move. Tap, tap, tap. Then a new sound, breathing. Not his own. Ragged, moist, animalistic. Then, the bell above his closet gave a single, sickly chime. And then silence. He held his breath. Tap. Something dragged itself across the floor. A long, slow slide, like flesh over wood. Matt's throat closed. His limbs went stiff. Suddenly, the closet door burst open, but nothing came out. Just the sound of that awful tapping. Now, right behind him, he spun around with the flashlight and saw it. Not fully, just a blurred silhouette, hunched and thin, its limbs too long, joints bending the wrong way. Its face was like a child's doll left in the sun too long, melting plastic, stretched leather, button eyes too large, mouth carved into a wide, unnatural grin. The light flickered. The figure was gone. Only the faint hiss of wind remained. The bells had stopped. At dawn, he found himself in the kitchen again. The birdcage was open, the wires bent. Inside, a single black feather, but not one like Buzz had. This one shimmered, oily and sharp, like it belonged to something else, something older. That day, he drove into town and found the only shop that might understand. A spiritual supplies store, tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. The old woman behind the counter didn't flinch when he told her what was happening. She just nodded and handed him a pouch of salt, a small mirror, and 4 silver bells. "Hang them on all 4 walls, and one more over your heart." He didn't ask why. Back home, he performed the ritual exactly as told. Salt lines, incense, bells strung up in the corners, and a mirror nailed to the ceiling, reflecting the room from above. That night felt still for a while, until exactly 3:30 a.m. The bells chimed again, but this time from inside the mirror. He looked up. The reflection didn't match the room. He was lying in bed, yes, but the reflected version of himself was staring at him, awake, motionless. Then, behind that mirrored version of him, the creature appeared. Not in the room, just in the mirror. Its mouth opened, wide and unnatural, and from it came a whisper, so loud it rattled the glass. "Let me in." Matt screamed and threw the lamp at the ceiling. The mirror shattered. The lights flickered. The room spun. And then all was dark. He awoke in daylight, on the floor. Everything was quiet. The mirrors were gone. The bells were gone. The salt lines blown away. He stood up slowly. The bedroom window was open, and in the middle of the floor lay a porcelain eye, smooth and wet. It blinked. Matt disappeared that night, His house was found days later by police. No sign of a break-in, no sign of struggle, only an open bird cage. And on the kitchen wall, a message scrawled in soot. You heard the tapping.